3 years earlier, our moving truck pulled into Willow Creek Estates on a perfect spring morning. The neighborhood was everything we had hoped for: mature oak trees lining the streets, children riding bicycles on sidewalks, and neighbors who waved as we unloaded our belongings. My husband James carried boxes while I helped our 12-year-old daughter Lily navigate the front steps of our new home. She moved carefully, deliberately, conserving her energy as she always did. Lily was born with a rare neuromuscular condition. From the outside, she looked like any other child: bright eyes, quick smile, a love for books and art. But inside her body, the signals between her brain and muscles sometimes misfired, causing episodes of weakness, pain, and fatigue that could appear suddenly and last for days. On good days, she could run and play. On bad days, she could barely walk from her bed to the bathroom without assistance. The previous owners had installed a small ramp at the back entrance, which was one reason we chose this house. We had carefully researched neighborhoods with good schools and accessibility, places where Lily could thrive despite her challenges. Willow Creek seemed perfect, close to her specialists, a school with experience accommodating invisible disabilities, and a community that appeared welcoming. Our first week, neighbors brought welcome baskets and introduced themselves. The Johnsons next door had a daughter Lily's age who quickly became her friend. The Patels across the street invited us to their weekend barbecue. For the first time since Lily's diagnosis, I felt we might have found a place where we could build a normal life, where her condition would not define our family. I remember standing in our kitchen that first month, watching through the window as Lily sat under a tree reading with her new friend. James wrapped his arms around my waist. "We made the right choice," he whispered. I nodded, not trusting my voice. After years of hospital visits, experimental treatments, and schools that did not understand, this neighborhood felt like a sanctuary. 2 days later, I received my first notice from the Homeowners Association. Our trash can had remained at the curb 6 hours after collection. The notice was impersonal, printed on sky blue paper with a generic warning about community standards. I apologized via email, explaining we were still settling in. The response came from Deborah Wilson, HOA president, assuring me it was merely a standard reminder. I first saw Deborah at the monthly HOA meeting we attended to introduce ourselves. She sat at the center of the board table, immaculately dressed in a cream blazer, her blonde hair cut in a perfect bob. She ran the meeting with precision, referring to bylaws by their exact numbers, interrupting residents who spoke too long. When we mentioned Lily's condition in passing while introducing our family, I noticed how Deborah's eyes narrowed slightly, how she assessed Lily from head to toe. "We have very specific guidelines about exterior modifications," she said after the meeting, handing me a thick binder of HOA regulations. "Everything must be approved in writing, landscaping, paint colors, accessibility features, everything." She emphasized the last word while maintaining a practiced smile. I nodded politely, but something in her tone made me uneasy. I did not know then that this woman would become our nemesis, that her fixation on rules would evolve into a personal crusade against my family. I did not know that her disbelief in what she could not see would bring us to the brink. In that moment, she was just another neighbor, and Willow Creek was still our peaceful new beginning. The first real confrontation happened 3 months after we moved in. Lily had been having a good stretch, weeks of minimal symptoms, energy enough for bike rides and homework without exhaustion. During these periods, we always encouraged her to enjoy her strength while it lasted. On this particular Saturday, she played in the front yard with neighborhood children, laughing as they tossed a frisbee back and forth. I was gardening nearby when a shadow fell across the flower bed. Deborah Wilson stood on our walkway, her arms crossed over her chest. "Your daughter seems very active for someone with a disability," she said, her tone conversational but her eyes sharp. I straightened, brushing dirt from my hands. Her condition fluctuates, I explained. She has good days and bad days. Deborah nodded, but her expression remained skeptical. Of course, she replied. How convenient. Before I could respond, she pointed to the small garden stones I had used to edge the flower bed. Those were not approved by the landscaping committee. You will need to submit a formal request. She handed me another notice before walking away. That evening, Lily crashed hard, her body punishing her for the day's activity. I sat beside her bed, applying heat packs to her aching legs. Why was that lady watching me today? She asked, her voice small. I stroked her hair, searching for an appropriate answer. Some people do not understand invisible disabilities, I said finally. They think if they cannot see it, it must not be real. The following week, we received a letter from our neurologist recommending a temporary wheelchair ramp at our front entrance. Lily had entered a flare-up cycle, her symptoms worsening with the change of seasons. The back ramp was helpful, but it required navigating uneven ground that was becoming increasingly difficult for her. I submitted the official accommodation request to the HOA, complete with the doctor's letter and architectural drawings that showed the ramp would match our home's exterior. The rejection came 2 weeks later, a form letter stating that front-facing modifications negatively impact neighborhood aesthetics and property values. I called Deborah directly, hoping to explain the situation more personally. I have reviewed your request thoroughly, she said, her voice crisp through the phone. The doctor's note is vague about necessity, and frankly, I saw your daughter playing just fine recently. These accommodations should be for people who truly need them. My hand tightened around the phone. Her ability varies day to day. That is the nature of her condition. I tried to keep my voice calm, educational rather than confrontational. On bad days, she cannot navigate steps safely. We all have bad days, Deborah replied dismissively. The HOA cannot approve special exceptions based on occasional discomfort. It sets a precedent. I took a deep breath. This is not about discomfort. This is about legal accessibility requirements under. I am well versed in the laws, she interrupted, and I am not convinced this qualifies. Submit more compelling medical evidence if you wish to appeal. She hung up before I could respond. The following day, I was collecting mail when Deborah approached with 2 other board members. They were discussing violation notices when they noticed me. Deborah smiled tightly. We were just talking about consistent enforcement, she said loudly enough for me to hear. Some families think they deserve special treatment, bending rules with dubious medical excuses. Her companions nodded as I stood frozen, letters clutched in my hand. From the corner of my eye, I saw Lily watching from our front window. The deliberate cruelty of the comment, directed so I would hear it but cushioned in plausible deniability, ignited something protective and fierce within me. That night, I researched disability laws until my eyes burned. I learned about the Fair Housing Act, about reasonable accommodations, about our rights that superseded HOA restrictions. As Lily slept fitfully down the hall, I made a silent promise. This was not a battle Deborah Wilson would win. What began as neighborhood politics had become something much more important, a fight for my daughter's dignity and rights. I did not yet know how ugly that fight would become. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, official HOA letterhead, Deborah's signature bold at the bottom. Our appeal had been denied by unanimous board vote. No front-facing wheelchair ramp would be permitted under any circumstances. Alternative suggestions included using the existing back entrance or considering a different neighborhood better suited to your needs. I stood in the kitchen, hands shaking with anger as I read the dismissive words. James took the letter from my trembling fingers, his expression darkening as he scanned the content. "They cannot do this," he said quietly. "This is discrimination, plain and simple." We decided to provide more comprehensive medical documentation. Lily's neurologist wrote a detailed letter explaining her condition, the unpredictable nature of her symptoms, the importance of accessible entrances, the medical necessity of accommodations. We included MRI results, treatment histories, and statements from her physical therapist. The package was professional, thorough, and impossible to dismiss for anyone acting in good faith. 2 days after submitting these documents, I noticed Deborah's silver SUV crawling past our house as Lily, and I returned from a doctor appointment. She slowed nearly to a stop, watching as I helped Lily from the car. The following day, I spotted her again, this time with her phone raised, apparently taking photos as James carried Lily inside during a particularly bad episode. The documentation was returned with a handwritten note. Medical information can be easily exaggerated or falsified. Visual evidence contradicts claims of mobility issues. Attached were printouts of photos, Lily walking to the mailbox, Lily sitting on the front step, Lily standing in the driveway. All taken without our knowledge or consent, all from days when her symptoms were manageable, all presented without context as proof she did not need accommodations. The surveillance continued. Neighbors reported Deborah questioning them about Lily's activities, asking if they had ever caught her running or playing normally. Some neighbors defended us, explaining what they had learned about invisible disabilities. Others began to avoid us, uncertainty in their eyes when they saw Lily having a good day. I overheard whispers at the school pickup line, comments about parents who trained their kids to act disabled for attention. The constant scrutiny took its toll on Lily. She became anxious about going outside, afraid of being watched and photographed. "What if I am having a good moment and she sees me?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "Will that mean I am lying about the bad days?" Her symptoms worsened with the stress, more frequent flare-ups, more intense pain, more days confined to her bed. Despite the rejection, we installed a temporary wooden ramp that could be removed if needed. We had no choice. Lily's mobility was declining, partly from her condition and partly from the psychological burden of constant disbelief. The violation notice arrived the next day, a $100 daily fine for unauthorized exterior modification. I called our family doctor in tears, explaining the situation. She referred us to a patient advocacy group specializing in invisible disabilities. Their representative, Alina, listened to our story with growing concern. "This happens more often than you would think," she said. "People with invisible conditions face discrimination because others cannot reconcile the good days with the bad days." Alina connected us with 3 other families in our county who had faced similar situations. One had eventually moved rather than continue fighting. Another had won their case through persistent advocacy. The third was still battling their HOA after 2 years of harassment. All described the same pattern: disbelief, surveillance, accusations of fraud, and deteriorating health due to stress. During this time, a few neighbors became our staunch allies. The Johnsons next door witnessed Lily's struggles firsthand and began documenting Deborah's surveillance behavior. Mrs. Patel brought meals during Lily's worst days and spoke publicly about the discrimination at neighborhood gatherings. But others kept their distance, unwilling to challenge the HOA board that controlled everything from property approvals to community privileges. James and I took turns standing guard, watching for Deborah's car, documenting her drive-bys and photo sessions. We installed a security camera that captured her slowing down to peer into our windows. We saved every email, every notice, every piece of correspondence. Our dining room table disappeared under stacks of medical records, legal research, and HOA communications. Our home no longer felt like a sanctuary but a fortress under siege. Lily's condition continued to worsen. Her neurologist noted increased inflammation markers, directly correlating with her stress levels. "This environment is medically detrimental," she wrote in her notes. "The psychological impact of being disbelieved is causing physical deterioration." She recommended therapy for the emotional trauma of having her disability questioned and invalidated daily. I lay awake at night, listening to Lily whimper in her sleep, wondering how we had gone from seeking a peaceful neighborhood to living under constant surveillance and suspicion. The woman who had transformed our lives into this nightmare lived just 3 doors down, continuing her campaign with the self-righteous certainty of someone who believed she was protecting her community from frauds. But her crusade was crushing my child, and something inside me hardened into resolute determination. This was no longer about a ramp or HOA rules. This was about my daughter's right to exist in her own home without having to prove her suffering was real. The monthly HOA meeting fell on a cool October evening. We arrived early, finding seats near the front where Lily could stretch her legs if needed. She had insisted on coming, despite having a moderate symptom day. "I want them to see me," she said with determination beyond her years. "Not just hear about me." James and I exchanged worried glances but respected her decision. At 13, she was learning to advocate for herself, a skill forced upon her too young by circumstance. Deborah called the meeting to order precisely at 7:00 p.m., working methodically through agenda items, landscaping contracts, holiday decoration guidelines, parking enforcement. When she reached open issues, she shuffled her papers and looked directly at us. "Before we continue, I need to address an ongoing situation that affects our community standards and property values." The room fell silent as she placed a folder on the table. "The Richardson family has repeatedly violated HOA regulations regarding unauthorized exterior modifications. Despite clear rejection of their request, they installed a ramp that does not meet aesthetic guidelines." She opened the folder, removing several photographs. "More concerning is the basis for their request, a disability accommodation that appears inconsistent with observed behavior." She began distributing the photos, images of Lily on different days, all taken without our knowledge or consent. "As you can see, the child in question displays normal mobility in these instances. The board questions whether this accommodation request is legitimate or an attempt to circumvent our standards." Murmurs spread through the room as neighbors examined the photos. Some looked uncomfortable, others nodded in agreement with Deborah. Lily shrank beside me, her face flushing with humiliation. I felt James tense, his hand gripping mine with increasing pressure. "Furthermore," Deborah continued, "this sets a dangerous precedent. If we allow exceptions based on unverifiable claims, we open the door to numerous violations that could affect all our property values." I could not remain silent any longer. I stood, my voice shaking with controlled fury. "Those photos were taken without permission, and they tell only a partial story. My daughter has a documented neuromuscular condition that—" "We have reviewed your documentation," Deborah interrupted, her voice cool, "and found it inconclusive. Many doctors will write accommodation letters without proper evaluation if patients are insistent enough." The room spun around me as rage and disbelief collided in my chest. "Are you accusing my daughter's medical team of fraud? The neurologists and specialists who have treated her for years?" "I am simply stating that paperwork is easily manipulated," she replied with practiced calm, "while observable evidence tells a different story." "Observable evidence," I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay composed. You know nothing about invisible disabilities. You know nothing about watching your child suffer on days you do not bother to document with your surveillance camera. You know nothing about the damage you are causing by teaching an entire neighborhood to distrust and monitor a child with a medical condition. Deborah's expression hardened. Please control yourself, Mrs. Richardson. This emotional display is inappropriate and inappropriate. James was on his feet now, his normally quiet demeanor replaced with protective anger. What is inappropriate is harassing a family and stalking a child. What is inappropriate is playing doctor when you have no medical training. What is inappropriate is violating federal housing laws because you cannot see past your precious property values. The room erupted in confused voices, some defending us, others supporting Deborah. Through the chaos, I saw Lily's face crumpling, tears streaming down her cheeks. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away, standing shakily before addressing the room in a voice that silenced everyone. My name is Lily, she said, her small voice steady despite her tears. I have complex regional pain syndrome with neuromuscular complications. Sometimes I can walk and play. Sometimes I cannot get out of bed because it feels like my nerves are on fire. I do not choose when these things happen. I do not pretend to be sick. Her voice broke slightly. And I did not ask to be watched and photographed and talked about like I am doing something wrong by existing in this neighborhood. Deborah stared at Lily, momentarily speechless, before recovering her composure. No one is suggesting you are doing anything wrong, dear. We are simply ensuring rules are followed consistently. Lily took a shuddering breath. You told Mrs. Peterson I was faking. I heard you. You said my parents were teaching me to act disabled for attention. A shocked silence fell over the room. Several neighbors turned to stare at Deborah, whose practiced smile faltered for the first time. Before she could respond, James guided Lily toward the door. We are done here, he said firmly. Any further communication can go through our attorney. At home, Lily collapsed on the couch, exhaustion and emotion overtaking her. As I held her trembling body, something inside me snapped. The constant struggle, the disbelief, the surveillance, it had gone beyond HOA politics into something cruel and damaging. I looked at James and no words were needed. We would fight this with every resource available to us. The following morning, certified letters arrived containing fines for both the unauthorized ramp and disruptive behavior at the HOA meeting. The total came to nearly $2,000 with a warning that additional daily fines would accrue until the ramp was removed. I placed the letters on our growing pile of documentation and made a phone call to Patricia Chen, an attorney specializing in disability rights law. Her office scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. As I hung up, I heard Lily crying in her room. I found her curled on her bed, clutching her tablet. On the screen was a neighborhood social media group where someone had posted photos from the meeting, with comments questioning her condition and our parenting. Why do they hate me? She whispered as I sat beside her. What did I do wrong? I gathered her in my arms, my heart breaking and resolving simultaneously. You did nothing wrong, I said fiercely. Nothing, and we are going to prove it. That afternoon, as Patricia Chen reviewed our documentation, her expression grew increasingly grave. When she finished, she removed her glasses and looked directly at us. What you are describing is textbook discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. The HOA is legally required to provide reasonable accommodations for disabilities, visible or invisible. She leaned forward, determination in her eyes. They have violated federal law. We are taking them to court. In that moment, sitting in the law office with Lily's hand in mine, I knew we had reached the point of no return. What had begun as a simple request for a ramp had become a battle for justice, dignity, and the right of my child to live without constant judgment. Deborah Wilson had pushed us to the breaking point, never imagining we would push back with the full force of the law behind us. The preparation for our legal battle consumed our lives completely. Patricia Chen advised us to document everything, every interaction, every symptom flare, every HOA communication. Our home transformed into a war room, with calendars marking Lily's good and bad days, files containing medical records dating back to her first diagnosis, and security camera footage showing Deborah's regular drive-bys of our property. Patricia explained our rights under the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act with patient clarity. "The law is unambiguous," she said, spreading documents across her desk. "Housing providers, including HOAs, must provide reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities. A temporary ramp that can be removed later is the definition of reasonable." She tapped a highlighted paragraph. "And the law specifically protects those with non-obvious disabilities. They cannot demand proof beyond legitimate medical documentation, which you have provided abundantly." We learned that Deborah had overstepped numerous legal boundaries, from the unauthorized surveillance to the public disclosure of private medical information at the HOA meeting. "Her actions constitute harassment," Patricia noted, adding these violations to our growing list of complaints. The most difficult part of our preparation involved additional medical testing for Lily. Her neurologist recommended updated brain and spinal MRIs to document the progression of her condition. These tests were physically grueling for her, hours of lying motionless in the loud, claustrophobic machine, painful contrast injections, and the subsequent symptom flares triggered by the stress and positioning. I will never forget her bravery during the MRI session. As technicians prepared to slide her into the narrow tube, panic flashed across her face. "I am scared," she whispered. I squeezed her hand. "I know, sweetheart, but these images will show what words cannot explain." She nodded, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes as the machine engulfed her. For 90 minutes, she remained perfectly still despite her discomfort, understanding somehow that these images might finally validate her invisible suffering. The results confirmed what we already knew: distinctive patterns of nerve damage and inflammation, consistent with her diagnosis. Her neurologist added a detailed report explaining how these physiological changes resulted in variable symptoms, good days and bad days that could not be predicted or controlled. The evidence was irrefutable to anyone with medical training. While we prepared our case, the HOA escalated their pressure. Deborah hired Gregory Palmer, an aggressive attorney known for representing developers and property associations. His first action was sending a threatening letter outlining potential countersuit options if we proceeded: defamation claims, demands for legal fees, and continued fines that could result in a lien against our home. "This is intimidation," Patricia said calmly when we forwarded the letter. "A standard tactic when they know they are vulnerable. It means we have a strong case." Her confidence bolstered our resolve, though the financial stakes weighed heavily on our minds. We had invested our savings in this home, in this neighborhood we once thought would be our sanctuary. Through the patient advocacy group, we connected with other families who had faced similar discrimination. We met with them in coffee shops and support group meetings, exchanging stories and strategies. The Matthews family had fought their condo association over a service dog for their son with autism. The Rodriguez family had battled for parking accommodations for their daughter with lupus. Some had prevailed, others had given up, worn down by the financial and emotional toll. Most disturbing were the stories we heard about Willow Creek Estates specifically. Alina from the advocacy group introduced us to the Thompsons, who had lived in our neighborhood 3 years earlier. Their request for accessibility modifications for their elderly father had been similarly denied, with Deborah leading the opposition. She claimed he could walk fine because she saw him on his good days, Mrs. Thompson explained, the experience still visibly painful. We eventually moved rather than fight. I have regretted it ever since. Another former resident, Mr. Collins, described being pressured to remove a therapeutic garden he had created for his PTSD. Deborah said mental health accommodations were trends and not real disabilities, he recalled bitterly. She told neighbors I was using my military service as an excuse to break the rules. A pattern emerged from these conversations, a systematic discrimination against invisible disabilities led primarily by Deborah Wilson. Patricia added these testimonies to our case file, noting that the pattern established a history of discriminatory practices beyond our individual situation. As our court date approached, certified letters with legal letterhead arrived weekly, each more threatening than the last. The fines continued to accumulate. Some neighbors avoided us entirely, while others offered quiet support, anonymous notes of encouragement in our mailbox, small gestures of solidarity at school events. Through it all, Lily showed a resilience that both inspired and broke my heart. "I'm not just fighting for myself," she told me one evening as we reviewed her testimony preparation. "I am fighting for everyone who has ever been told their pain is not real because it cannot be seen." At 13, my daughter had been forced to become an advocate, to defend her right to exist in her own body. The unfairness of this burden strengthened my determination to see this through to the end. The night before our first court appearance, I sat alone at our dining table surrounded by the evidence of our struggle, medical files, legal documents, photographs, and testimony outlines. The weight of it all pressed down on me, the financial risk, the emotional toll on Lily, the uncertain outcome. For a moment, I wondered if we should have simply moved away like others before us. Then I heard Lily's voice from her bedroom, laughing at something James had said. The sound of her joy, still possible despite everything she had endured, crystallized my resolve. We were not just fighting for a ramp or against an HOA. We were fighting for her right to be believed, for her dignity, for her future in a world that too often demands visible proof of invisible pain. Whatever happened in court tomorrow, that fight was already worth everything. The county courthouse loomed before us, all stone columns and imposing steps. Lily stood between James and me, wearing a blue dress she had chosen carefully the night before. "I want to look nice," she had explained, "but I do not want to look too healthy or too sick." The fact that my 13-year-old daughter had to consider how her appearance would affect her credibility made my heart ache. Patricia met us at the entrance, her confidence steadying our nerves. "Remember," she said quietly as we approached the courtroom, "we have the law and the facts on our side. Do not let them provoke emotional responses. Speak your truth clearly and let the evidence speak for itself." Inside, Deborah Wilson sat with Gregory Palmer and 2 other HOA board members. She wore a conservative gray suit, her posture rigid with certainty. When our eyes met briefly, I saw not malice but genuine conviction in her gaze. Somehow, that was worse, the realization that she truly believed she was protecting her community from manipulators and rule breakers. Judge Alina Martinez called the court to order, reviewing the case before her. "This is a civil action alleging violations of the Fair Housing Act regarding reasonable accommodations for disabilities," she stated. "The court will hear evidence from both parties regarding the claim." Gregory Palmer presented the HOA's case first, his voice resonant with practiced authority. "Your Honor, This case is about maintaining community standards that all residents agreed to upon purchasing their homes. The Homeowners Association has a duty to enforce these standards consistently, without preferential treatment. He displayed the HOA covenant highlighting architectural restrictions, then photos of our temporary ramp. The plaintiffs installed this unauthorized structure after their request was denied through proper channels. The denial was based not on discrimination, but on insufficient evidence of necessity given observable contradictory behavior. The evidence followed Deborah's photos showing Lily walking, standing, sitting on the front steps. Palmer presented them chronologically, creating an impression of consistent mobility that erased the reality of her fluctuating symptoms. As you can see, Your Honor, the child demonstrates normal physical capabilities on numerous occasions, raising reasonable questions about the necessity of architectural modifications. When Deborah took the stand, she spoke with the calm certainty of someone who believed completely in her position. As HOA president, my responsibility is to all homeowners who expect their property values to be protected by consistent enforcement of our covenants. The Richardsons were aware of these restrictions when they purchased their home. She described receiving our accommodation request, reviewing our initial documentation, and finding it vague and inconsistent with observed behavior. Her voice remained measured, reasonable. We requested additional information because what we were seeing did not match what was being claimed. That is due diligence, not discrimination. During cross-examination, Patricia maintained professional composure, though I could sense her controlled anger. "Ms. Wilson, are you a medical professional?" she asked. "No, but..." "Do you have training in neurology or rehabilitative medicine?" "No, I do not." "Yet you felt qualified to determine that medical documentation from board-certified specialists was insufficient based on your personal observations." Deborah's composure slipped slightly. I observed inconsistencies that raised legitimate questions. "Did you consult with any medical professionals to help you understand how neuromuscular conditions can present with variable symptoms?" "That was not necessary for..." "So you made medical judgments without medical expertise," Patricia stated rather than asked. "One final question, Ms. Wilson. Are you aware that surveilling and photographing a minor without parental consent potentially violates privacy laws?" A flush spread across Deborah's face. I was documenting rule violations, not surveilling. When my turn came to testify, I fought to keep my voice steady as I described Lily's condition, our need for the ramp, and the escalating harassment we had experienced. Palmer's cross-examination was aggressive, designed to provoke emotional reactions he could use to undermine my credibility. "Is it not convenient that your daughter's condition allows her to participate in activities she enjoys, but becomes debilitating when compliance with rules is required?" he asked with calculated skepticism. Before I could respond, Judge Martinez interrupted. "Counsel, rephrase your question in a non-leading and non-inflammatory manner." The pivotal moment arrived when Patricia called Dr. Sarah Jennings, Lily's neurologist, to the stand. After establishing her credentials, 20 years specializing in pediatric neuromuscular disorders, published research on variable presentation conditions, Patricia asked her to explain Lily's diagnosis. Dr. Jennings spoke directly to Judge Martinez. "Lily has complex regional pain syndrome with neuromuscular complications. This condition affects how signals travel between her brain and muscles, causing unpredictable episodes of weakness, pain, and fatigue." "And would it be possible for someone with this condition to appear normal on some occasions and require mobility assistance on others? Patricia asked. Not only possible but expected, Dr. Jennings replied firmly. The hallmark of this condition is its variability. Patients often experience cycles of relative wellness followed by severe symptom flares, often triggered by stress, weather changes, or physical exertion. Patricia nodded. I would like to present Exhibit C, Your Honor. The bailiff distributed copies of Lily's recent MRI results as Dr. Jennings moved to the display screen. The images appeared, stark black and white evidence of the invisible condition that had shaped our lives. Dr. Jennings pointed to specific areas, explaining in accessible terms what we were seeing. These lighter areas indicate inflammation along the nerve pathways. This pattern here shows abnormal signal transmission. These changes are consistent with Lily's reported symptoms and explain why her mobility varies from day to day. I glanced at Deborah, whose eyes were fixed on the images, her expression shifting from skepticism to uncertainty. For the first time, she was seeing what she had refused to believe: physical evidence of an invisible disability, undeniable and medically verified. Dr. Jennings continued, In my professional opinion, accessibility accommodations are medically necessary for Lily, particularly during symptom flares when navigating steps becomes dangerous. Denying these accommodations not only violates her rights, but has contributed to the deterioration of her condition through added stress and physical barriers. As the MRI images remained displayed on the screen, I felt a weight lifting, the burden of constantly trying to prove what could not be seen, finally made visible for all to witness. In Deborah's face, I saw the beginning of understanding, the first crack in the wall of her certainty. The truth was finally visible, displayed in high resolution for everyone to see. Judge Martinez's ruling came 2 weeks later, delivered in a courtroom much quieter than during our testimonies. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony presented, she began, her voice firm and clear. This court finds that Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association violated the Fair Housing Act by failing to provide reasonable accommodation for a documented disability. She detailed each violation methodically: the improper denial of our request, the inadequate interactive process, the harassment and surveillance constituting a hostile housing environment. The medical evidence presented unequivocally establishes the plaintiff's daughter's disability and the necessity of the requested accommodation. The judge looked directly at Deborah and the HOA representatives. This court orders the immediate approval of the accommodation request with no further impediments. All accrued fines are to be nullified. Furthermore, the plaintiffs are awarded damages in the amount of $75,000 for emotional distress and violation of civil rights. She paused, then added, The court also orders the HOA board to complete fair housing training with emphasis on invisible disabilities within 60 days. Outside the courthouse, sunshine broke through clouds that had threatened rain all morning. Lily stood straighter than I had seen in months, as if a burden beyond the physical had been lifted from her shoulders. They believed me, she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. They really believed me. The transformation began slowly but spread throughout our community. The quarterly HOA newsletter announced Deborah's resignation from the board to pursue other interests, alongside a new commitment to accessibility education.